Hello everyone, my name is Anna and welcome back to this new video on this channel Jóvenes Experimentando. In today's video we will be studying chapter 50 of Genesis, and we will also be giving a conclusion of this book. But first, let's remember what we learned in the last video. In the last video we saw the last part of Jacob's life, how he passed or how he blessed each and every one of his children. And at the same time, we saw that not only were these words a blessing towards them, but these words also had a prophetic message that later on we will be able to read that was fulfilled. This is what we learned, or what we saw in the last video. And in today's video, we will be seeing this last chapter of Genesis. We will be where we're going to see we're going to see that Jacob was buried, and we will also see Joseph's death. And in today's video is titled "The End of the Patriarchs and Beginning of a People." Here we will see how the end somehow comes in the life of the patriarchs, ending with Joseph, how all these patriarchs had already died, just such as Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and now with Joseph. And although all the patriarchs died, but we see that everything is not over. They still have some hope in the promises of the Creator. We can see that, in today's chapter, we're going to see how Joseph, when he was dying, he had hope in the promises of the Creator, and he tells, this hope that he had, he tells it to the people of Israel. We can see that the promises that we are going to see, these promises are like such as the resurrection and the redemption through the Messiah, in which they believed and waited. And therefore we're going to see that they died and they were buried with that hope and that promise. At the same time, we will be seeing that it's not only the end of how the patriarchs ended, but we're going to also see this new beginning. We're going to see this new beginning of the people, through those 12 tribes, and how those 12 tribes would multiply, would become a lot of people, would have a lot of descendants, a lot of generations, and how they were going to become like the stars in the sky, a lot, how they became, how they're going to become a people, which till our days, they're known as the people of Israel. Starting off with verses 1 through 3, it says, Joseph threw himself on his father's body. He wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph talked to the doctors who served him. He told them to prepare the body of his father Israel to be buried. So the doctors prepared it. They took 40 days to do it. They needed that much time to prepare a body in the right way. The Egyptians mourned for Jacob 70 days. And here in these first 3 verses, we see that we can see, the first thing we see is Jacob's death. We see how Joseph called his doctors to prepare his father's body to be buried. And one thing that we see here is that Jacob is not mentioned as Jacob, but he's mentioned as Israel. And we can also see in the last part of the last part of verse 3, we can see that it says that the Egyptians mourned for Jacob 70 days. And some people believe and some people say that Jacob's 70 days of mourning refers to one day it is for one day for each nation. And originally all there was only 70 nations in that time. And this was because in relation to the confusion where the creators sent different languages, where how we learned that this happened in when Nimrod wanted to build the big tower. And well, we can see that the creator sends these different languages. And well, it is believed that since there were 70 different languages, that is why there were 70 different nations. And well, this could perhaps be an explanation about these 70 days of Jacob's mourning. So this is what people believe in this, where people say that these 70 days of that the Egyptians mourned for Jacob were or it refers to all the 70 nations that were in their time in that time. Following verses 4 through 6, it says, after the days of sadness had passed, Joseph went to Pharaoh's officials. He said to them, if you are pleased with me, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him, my father made me give my word to him. He said, I'm about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. So let me go there and bury my father. Then I'll come back. Pharaoh said, go there and bury your father. Do what he made you promise to do. And well, here we see how this death was something very important for Jacob, we can see how Jacob here, how this was something very important for Jacob, that he made Joseph swear. He made Joseph give him his word that he was going to bury him in the indicated place. And in the principles of the Torah, we see that swearing, or that giving your word, was something very important. It was something that cannot be broken. It was something that person who would give their word were committed to fulfilling it. There was no way back. And in this case, we see that a very important matter is sworn based on how Jacob would be buried and where he was going to be buried. We can see how he gives that importance through the oath. This is why, later on we will see why it was important that their bones be buried. Continuing with verses 7 through 11 says, so Joseph went to Canaan to bury his father. All Pharaoh's officials went with him. They were the important people of his court and all the leaders of Egypt. Joseph's family also went. His brothers and all the rest of his father's family went. Only their children and their flocks and herds were left in Goshen. Chariots and horsemen also went up with him. It was a very large group. They came to Atad, a place where corn was processed. It was near the river Jordan. There they sobbed loudly and bitterly. Joseph set apart 7 days of sadness to honor his father's memory. And well, these details are also important to see them, like this death that has been talked about, how when we can see this importance on how when righteous people die, it's a big loss for their loved ones. It's something that was lamented for. It was a sadness that was, it was a heavy sadness for their loved ones. And but from there on out, we can see that it is not mentioned that they did ceremonies. We can see here, or we can read here, that it is not mentioned that Joseph and his brothers and his people and the Pharaoh's people made funeral rituals, or they made ceremonies in honor of Jacob, of Jacob, as the Egyptians normally did, or as the other nations did. And even today, nowadays, we can see that in some way it is seen as celebrating the death through, we can see that the death is celebrated through songs, through rituals, through funerals, through ceremonies, through anything really. We can see that the death is being celebrated, or that the death is being celebrated. And even but we know that this was not done to Jacob, but we can only see that, or we can only read that the people lamented and wept. They cried for him. They cried for him. And another important date that we see in this time, based on this, we can see how Joseph mourned his father for 7 days, and we can make a reference that we can take into account that only 7 days are mentioned. We can see here that 7 days are only mentioned, no more days, nor such as 9 in the case of the Egyptians, who had their beliefs and used that number a lot. Here we do not see that the number 9 is used, or the number 8, or any other number. We can just see that the number 7 is used. In verses 11 through 13 it says, "When the Canaanites who lived there saw the mourning at the threshing floor of Atad, they said, 'The Egyptians are holding a solemn ceremony of mourning.' This is why that place near the Jordan is called Abel Mizraim." Mizraim means weeping, means weeping Egypt. So continuing with the verses. So Jacob's sons did as he had commanded them. They carried him to the land of Canaan and buried him in the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre, which Abraham had bought along with the field as a burial place from Ephron, the Hittite. In these verses, we can see how the importance of the burial is taken from before, so much that we see that Abraham thinks about this and buys a property where they were going to be buried. And we'll continue with verse 14. It says, "After burying his father, Joseph returned to Egypt together with his brothers and all the others who had gone with him to bury his father." This part ends like this, but it is good to see some important things within this text. One of them is the burial. The fact that they were buried in Machpelah, the place that Abraham bought, and later we will be able to read that Joseph also tells his children that they would take him, or that they would take his remains to that place, just like Jacob told Joseph to take his remains in that place, or to that place. This is something that we're going to see later on, and we can see the burial as a correct way to make it biblical. We see that the patriarchs and even Yeshua, who after dying were buried, we can see that within these texts, ancient practices are not mentioned, they are not used, such as practical examples of the Canaanites, Egyptians, or practices that are seen nowadays. And even later, we can see that the people of Israel are told that they will not be assimilated to those practices. So we're going to see later on how they are told and they are warned that they should not assimilate, to these practices that the Egyptians, the Canaanites, and other nations that were that existed in that time, these practices that they did, that the people of Israel were not allowed to be part of these practices. And something that we can see in the instruction that supports this burial is when Adam is told in Genesis 3:19, by the sweat of your brow you will eat your food until you return to the ground, since from it you were taken. From dust, for dust you are, and to dust you will return. And here we can see how it is mentioned that he would return, that Adam would return to the dust, speaking of a grave, to the ground, how he was going to return to the ground, and not that his body was, or that his body passed through water or fire and it would turn into ashes. And that's not what it means. But it mentions how we were created and how we would return to the dust through the grave. And this biblical method, this biblical method is what we see. And something that we must understand is why they keep their remains. And this is because they had the original faith, which we see in the patriarchs. It was what they believed in, the promises of the Creator. For example, the resurrection through Yeshua, which is fulfilled once Yeshua dies. We see that it is mentioned that many bodies of the righteous, such as the patriarchs, were raised when Yeshua died. We can read that they were raised, and that is known as the first resurrection, which they expected, and therefore that kept, and that is why these people kept their remains. And those same promises are what we believe now, knowing that it is not about the physical body but about the soul. This is going to about the soul that is going to be raised through Yeshua. So the patriarchs, when sending or when telling people to take their remains, they did not do it, or they did not do it thinking in their physical body, but they were thinking of their soul. And this topic of resurrection was spoken by Yeshua in his time with the religious people, and how these people asked the Messiah who would marry the widow woman when all her husbands resurrected. And here Yeshua, we can see that, or we can read that Yeshua replies that it is not as it is believed in this earthly world, but it is about the soul. That it is not about the body. It is not about what's going to happen in, let's say, when they resurrect, but it's talking about the soul. What is going to happen to the soul? In the Torah, there is no literal talk of a resurrection, but we do see how the ancients believed in it. From verses 15 through 21, we see how once Jacob dies, his brothers were, Joseph's brothers were afraid of how Joseph might act now with them, because, they were afraid of how he was going to act towards them, due to the fact that, or due to what they had done to him, of selling him, and they thought that he was going to take revenge for what they did. But in verses 19 through 21, we can read that Joseph did not hold a grudge against them. He did not hate them. He did not plan on taking revenge towards them, but he understood that all of the things that happened at that time, they happened because of a greater purpose, because the Eternal allowed it for a reason, to fulfill its purposes. And here we can learn something from the patriarch Joseph, who, despite everything he went through all the battles he went through all the hard times he went through, um, how yeah, how all the things he went through, he still forgives his brothers. He doesn't take anger. He doesn't take out his anger towards them. And we can also see that this also happens with Yeshua, who went through the similar situations, who was betrayed by one of his closest disciples, who was there listening to his teachings, who was there by his side. We can see, or we can read how Yeshua, in the time where he was being where he was hung in the how he was hung when he was dying, how he asks for forgiveness, because those people, the people that were killing him, that were finishing with him, they did not know what they were doing. And we can see, and we can also read how Yeshua, when he is betrayed, he still applies the forgiveness, just as Joseph did. We can see that, such as Joseph, like Yeshua, both apply forgiveness towards the people that did bad to them. In verses 22 through 24, we can see, or we can read that it tells us how Joseph how Joseph got to see the third generation of Ephraim's children. It also tells us that the children of Machir, son of Manasseh, son of Joseph, were raised closely to Joseph. He had both the opportunity to have the sons of, or the children of Machir being raised close to him, just as he had the opportunity to see the third generation of Ephraim's children. And it also tells us how Joseph lived up to 110 years. And we can also see, or we can also read, how the time of Joseph had already come, how it was time for him to go to rest already. And we can see how Joseph was also very present in the promise to all these patriarchs had. He believed in it. He believed in that promise, and he knew that he was going to die, but he knew that the promise was going to continue, that the promise was not going to die, and that it was going to continue. And this is why in verses 22, or in verses 25 through 26, it says, and Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath and said, Elohim will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110. And after they embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Here we can see how Joseph, through the words of swearing, gives off the same importance to his death as his father Jacob did. We saw in the beginning how Jacob made his son Joseph give his word that he was going to bury him in the indicated place that Jacob would tell him. And here we can see that this is also happening with Joseph. We can see here that Joseph, now when he's dying, is making his brothers give him his word. And something interesting that we can see both in Jacob and Joseph were that they were embalmed after they died. And this is something curious, because within the Hebrews, this type of practice was not something very common. It was not something that they would usually do with their loved ones. And the oldest references of this practice date back to ancient Egypt, and it is what is known as embalming, mummification. This was a very old practice whose objective was basically to preserve the integrity of all corpses, preventing their putrefaction. And something important to see in this practice is how it is originated. It is said that it is originated due to the beliefs in the immorality of the human spirit, according to Egyptian methodology, and will giving rise to the development of embalming or mummification in order to preserve the identity of the individual after the earthly life. Another important point is that embalming was a laborious process that lasted several months or a long time, and this is the reason why we see in the beginning where it says that it took the doctors 40 days, I believe, to prepare Jacob's body. So all of this was a long process. Another interesting point is that not everyone had the access to being embalmed. Only a few people had that opportunity, and only a few people, and some important people, such as the pharaohs, who they had the opportunity to be embalmed because the pharaohs who were considered immortal, the pharaohs who were considered immortal, and for them, they were the only people who could continue living in the afterlife according to their beliefs. This is what the Egyptians thought, and this is why they thought that the pharaohs could, be embalmed, because that's how they considered them. And not only important people were embalmed, but also, or it is also said that other creatures that were considered living incarnations of the gods or their manifestations were also embalmed, as they have been found in modified state. And these animals were like bulls, crocodiles, cats, snakes, or many different type of animal species. And another important thing is that is mentioned regarding mummification. It is said that before it was done in a natural way, where the corpses were wrapped in animal skins and allowed to dry off for their preservation, which was achieved thanks to the favorable conditions of that place, such as the action of heat, the dryness, and the sand of the desert, because as we know, Egypt was in the desert. And all this in the company of the use of products that nature offered them. And it is important to note that the products that were used were changing and that were perfecting over time. As time passed, all these products that the nature offered them were being perfected over the time, and it was something that was changing. And we can see that in this chapter 50 of Genesis, it ends with the promise that the Creator would visit Israel. We can see that Joseph tells them that the Creator, or that Elohim, would visit Israel. And this is something that later on in the next book, known as Exodus, we will be seeing how Exodus alludes to the liberation. We're going to see how the people of Israel went into slavery, were slaves, became slaves of Egypt, and we were going to be able to see that they're going to be liberated through Moses. Moses is going to be their liberator. And the Eternal uses Moses to liberate or to free his people. And this is something that we're going to see, that this promise this promise is fulfilled in the book of Exodus. And to conclude with this book, to give the conclusion of this whole book, we saw many things. But one of the main important things that we saw is in the beginning we saw that it talked about the main one. We can see that it talked about the creation, but we can also see that it talked about, or we learned that it talked about the main one, who is Yeshua. And we learned that one of the things that this book shows in the beginning is the pre-existence of Yeshua. We saw that he was there, that he has been there since the beginning, and that the eternal, that with him, with Yeshua, the eternal created everything. Another thing that we saw is that through Yeshua, not only everything was created, but also redemption is given by the condition of sin in which man fell. We can see the fall of man. We can see that this happened with Adam and Eve, started off with them, and that is where the redemption is given. And we also saw how to correctly approach the eternal, looking for that redemption that was only through, in that time, it was only through the blood of animals. For them, it was they had to make sacrifices for that redemption. And this is one reason why we see that Cain could not redeem himself. When Cain offers his offering to the eternal, we can see, or this is the reason why he couldn't redeem himself with his fruits, because it was necessary. There was the need for blood, and but that later on, this sacrifice or this redemption was through the Messiah's sacrifice, which nowadays we don't need to make any sacrifice, but through the Messiah's sacrifice is that we can find the redemption. And we also learned about the rebellion. In this case, we saw it with Nimrod, and we saw how he confronted the eternal, and this shows us not to confront the creator, just as Nimrod did, who, as we learned, he was the one who built, or who tried to build, the great tower that he hoped that tower would reach the heights of the heaven, which this is where we see that the creator did not allow this, and this is where we see that the creator this is where the creator gives these 7 different languages, and that is where the confusion begins with these people, because now none of them some of the people talked different languages. And we saw we saw about the rebellion. We also saw a characteristic of this book is that from the beginning, it is showing us an order regarding the creation, the day of rest, the union, and among many other things. We see that we can see that order that is very important in the life of any person, especially in today's youth. It is important that we apply that perfect order which everything was like from the beginning, to return to the state of perfection as everything was in order in the beginning, and not to fall into what we currently see in society, not to fall into, or especially what the youth does, not to fall in unions between different genders or between the same genders, not to fall in believing different theories that men put to the youth, and having different beliefs. We can see this is something that we should not do, and we should not believe. We should not fall into believing in theories that men put, but rather we should focus and we should see how it all was since the beginning, how the Eternal created us, how everything that the Eternal did since the beginning was in order, was with perfection, and lastly, we see how the patriarchs, both men and women, were the first to receive the call to believe in this original faith, and this is something that we also have well, we have these people as examples to have, or on how, as examples, as examples of how to live a life correctly, just as they did. A life that the Eternal accepts, and will, the patriarchs, such as women and men, teach us that they went through the world pilgrimaging, and that they were looking for those promises that the Creator gave them. They had that faith that now we must also have, not only as youth, but also as adults, as children, as teens. We must have this same faith that they had, and we also see that, and not only that we should have that same faith, but that we continue to preserve and wait for the promises. And well, this is what we saw in the whole book of Genesis. These are the main points that we saw. And well, this is all for today's video. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any questions or any comments, you can put them down in the comment section down below. And thank you very much for your time. Bye.